Is that chair supposed to be doing that?
Yes.
Okay.
Does it look weird?
Very, yes. Is it like for something in particular, or?
No, it was, it's supposed to be, what's the word? Ergonomic? Ergonomic? Good for your back?
I think that'd be worse for my back.
Really? I find it more comfortable. Although I can't sit in it for long periods of time.
There you go. That's.
Yeah. I mean, I can't sit, period.
That's what chairs are for.
Hello and welcome to All Doubt. I'm Joel.
And I'm Vincent.
And today we are on our part 2 of our capital C for classic films. In this case, capital C standing for Citizen Kane. But first, Vincent, what's new?
Oh, I'm not used to being the first on the what's new.
Yeah, I jumped right into it.
No, it's exciting. The other day, I think it was yesterday. Forget if it was yesterday. Anyway, recently, I watched a new movie, The Greatest Showman.
Oh, okay.
Have you heard of this one?
It sounds familiar.
It's the Hugh Jackman musical movie where he is P.T. Barnum.
Oh, right, yes.
And it was neat. It was fun.
Yeah.
It wasn't entirely historically accurate, but it was a musical, so I don't care. It was neat. It had arguably the two leads were Hugh Jackman and Zac Efron, the guy from High School Musical and other things as well. But it was a very fun musical. The songs were catchy. I went and put some of them on my phone, so I have them now. But there was one song. I wouldn't say it was a duet, but it's one of those where, in a musical when two characters, argue against each other in a song. Yeah. One of those, like a song battle kind of things.
Yeah.
It was one of those between Zac Efron's character and Hugh Jackman's character, and they were in a bar, and there was no one in the bar except Hugh Jackman's character and Zac Efron's character and the bartender. And the bartender did not say a word, but he totally pulled his weight in the song. It was nuts. He was doing these weird bartender tricks. He was in tune with the music. He was flipping the tumblers in the air. He was sweeping the floor in rhythm with it was great. It was
okay.
It was a neatly choreographed number. And that is one of the things I didn't notice until I saw it pointed out when I was reading up about the movie. Oh, that chair's turning on you now.
It's already exhausting.
For the listeners at home, Joel is in a weird chair.
It's a kneeling chair. You might have seen it before. You kneel instead of sitting. And it's nice for a change, but I can't stand it for more than apparently 2 minutes.
You can't stand it? I see what you did there.
Oh.
Anyway. With the movie, there was something I hadn't noticed until it was pointed out, but I guess I might have subconsciously noticed it, but I hadn't. Anyway, that all the dancing during the songs really, incorporated the area it was taking place in.
Oh, neat.
Like the one in the bar, it incorporated the bartender and him, sliding shots to Zac Efron's character and Hugh Jackman's character. Mm-hmm. There's a duet between Zac Efron's character and Zendaya's character in the center ring of the big top or whatever after hours, and incorporating them being in a circus and her being a trapeze artist, trapeze performer, trapeze.
Is this a real person?
What do you mean?
You're talking about a character based off of a real trapeze?
I don't know if the character is based on an actual person, but the character was a trapeze person,
right? Yeah,
and incorporated that into the dancing of that song.
Oh, neat.
So they were swinging on the ropes and going up and down on the ropes and stuff, and it was really neat in that. Almost every song, if not every song, I haven't, noticed it at the time, but it totally matches hearing it afterwards. Almost every song utilized the space as part of the choreography of the dancing. And I guess I sort of noticed this in one of the beginning musical numbers between, P.T. Barnum, Hugh Jackman's character, and, his childhood love interest, whose name was Charity, I believe. It's one of those, old-timey, on-the-nose names. And they were dancing on a rooftop, and it was one of those, old-timey New York rooftops where they have, the clotheslines.
Oh, yeah.
Up.
And the cool, chimneys and shingles and all that.
Yeah, not so much the chimneys. It was mostly just entirely covered in like clotheslines.
Oh.
But
Is
whenever
that accurate?
there was a part where, at least on this like particular roof, when he, as part of the dancing, Hugh Jackman like lifts up. I don't remember the actress's names, and I apologize, but like lifts up Charity as part of like a, like a figure skating ballet kind of. You lift up your partner, and there was, I guess, like a gust of wind in the background, so all the bed sheets, I guess, it was all just bed sheets. I guess they have a bunch of bed sheets, even though they're all poor. They're just drying all their bed sheets, but they all like flared up in a way that matched what the what Charity was doing when she was lifted up. It was a neat like synchronicity.
Oh, cool.
Between the environment and the two leads that you're watching. And it was really fun. A fun movie. I really enjoyed it. But also, I, in the time since we last recorded, I played my first 2 games of Dungeons & Dragons.
Oh, no way.
Yeah.
That's great. I don't think I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but I currently Dungeon Master, and I love Dungeons & Dragons. But tell me about your experience.
Yeah, like I listened to, as part of my huge playlist of podcasts that I listen to, at least one of them or a couple of them are actual plays of tabletop games. This is the one I'm talking about in particular is RPPR, Role Playing Public Radio. Really good. I really recommend it.
Yeah.
But I've been listening to that one for a while. It's like several years now that I think about it. But I hadn't really played a tabletop game in any like extended, meaningful amount of time. The first time I played was like the last 10 or 15 minutes of a D&D game back when I was living in the dorms, because one of the players I showed up late and they were already like halfway through, so I didn't want to, insert. I didn't want to make a character, make them stop, make a character and insert my character. So I was just sitting and watching and observing, them playing it. But then one of them towards the end had to leave. So I just hopped in for the last 10, 15 minutes.
Oh, that's fun. Well, yeah. I think that's one of the strengths of that game is that you can do that if you have the time and the means to.
Yeah. And so that was the one time. And then a couple other times I played 1 or 2 games of Mouse Guard. Are you familiar with Mouse Guard?
No.
It's, from what I understand, it's one of the other, it's not as complex as D&D, so sometimes they recommend it as one of, the beginner ones. Oh. Not to undersell it, but it's I guess not as, a big a behemoth as D&D has grown to be. Mm-hmm. But the narrative, the universe of Mouse Guard is conceptually pretty interesting. It's, do you remember Redwall, with the mice and the...
Yeah, that's actually the first thing I thought of when you said that. I thought you were talking about it's books, right? That series of books.
And then the cartoon in the early 90s.
Yeah.
Which were more serious business than I was looking for at the time.
Oh, really?
In terms of cartoons. But in Mouse Guard, it's a similar thing, except you are not, you are a mouse and you are a guard of this mouse enclave, or these one of these of several mouse cities.
Oh.
I guess, sort of a medieval level kind of technology level. Mm. But you're mouse sized, whereas I think in Redwall, all the animals are more or less the same size and they're sort of anthropomorphized.
Right.
Right. But in this one, you are mouse sized and the other animals are the size of the other animals.
Oh, that's neat.
So instead of a dragon they would have in D&D, it's just a cat.
Oh, yeah.
So when at the end of a campaign, when you fight a dragon, you're just fighting a tabby cat that just happens to be wandering through your part of the woods or something.
Oh, man.
But yeah, I played a game or 2 of that before that sort of fell apart, and I moved onto campus and someone else later moved for another job. Mm-hmm. And this is the first proper on purpose intentionally long-term game, or game that's aiming to be a long-term game that I've been a part of, and it's really fun. We've only been able to have 2 sessions.
Yeah.
And I think we're gonna only be able to average 1 session a month. But yeah, no, it's very fun. I'm really enjoying it.
Great.
Both sessions so far have ended in the middle of a combat.
Oh, what?
Really? Because of weird timing issues or people having to leave at a particular time. So and I'm not worried about saying this on the air because it won't come out for several months, based on our release schedule. But, I have a plan for how I'm going to resolve, there being such a huge gap and it being in the middle of a combat. I've been able to plan out what my character is going to do when I get back into it.
Oh, yeah, of course. That's the problem with that.
And
what's your plan?
Well, I don't want to get into too much detail because I'd have to I don't want to get too long about it.
Explanation.
A lot of explanation, right? I have a plan that I think I prior to enacting my plan, when it gets to my turn next time we get together about it, I have some clarification questions to make sure some of the details.
Breathe fire.
That'd be awesome though. I do have a spell that can make it look like I'm breathing fire though.
Thaumaturgy?
No, it's one of the, I'm playing a bard.
Oh, okay.
So I've got a lot of nonsense, just sleight of hand.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of nonsense spells.
Oh, yeah. I see.
But, so I've got some questions that I want to clarify that if I'm right, I could argue to make some bonuses for the thing I'm going to do.
Oh, okay.
But even if they don't pan out, I'm still pretty confident that my plan is going to work.
Oh, nice.
So, fingers crossed about that.
Yeah.
But that's what I've been doing. How about you, Joel? What have you been up to?
Well, you mentioned D&D. I just started dungeon mastering, and I hope we haven't lost anybody with that, because I feel like, people who first hear about D&D or hear you talk about Dungeons and Dragons, a lot of people still think of it as sort of what I thought of it as a kid, as just the dorkiest thing in the world, the quintessential dorky thing, where I mean, you can still consider that, do it if you want to, but it's so much more than that. For me, the idea of Dungeons and Dragons, opened up to me from listening to The Adventure Zone, done by the McElroy brothers. It's another great podcast to listen to, if you have the time, because there are a lot of episodes, but I know you can't listen to it.
Yeah, I think we mentioned this a bit during the Die Hard episode. The Text Adventure episode.
Oh, yeah.
A couple episodes ago.
Yeah.
Where, you were you would enjoy it a lot more if you start from episode 1. And I was I do not have the time for that nonsense.
Well, yeah, absolutely. That's just it. If you have the time, listen to it. Or just, they're doing some new experimental stuff right now as we're recording this, so now would be a good time to start listening to it too. Anyways, the Adventure Zone showed to me that Dungeons and Dragons can be structured improv. And that's the way I've been thinking about it as a dungeon master or a game master. Sometimes people say that, where we're coming up with this story together, and it doesn't have to be anything that we don't want it to be. So if we want to do something, we'll do it. If we don't, we won't. And that's been really great. I like it for that reason.
I think for the longest time, the depiction of Dungeons and Dragons in, TV and movies has always been the, same as the, classical nerd, depiction of, suspenders and Coke bottle, thick, eyeglasses and, pocket protectors in a basement covered in acne and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But, relatively recently, there have been a lot of rather positive depictions of D&D, in Stranger Things. It's a pretty big, not a pretty, it's in the background. The characters reference it,
and
weirdly frequently.
There's also Harmon Quest. There's
Harmon Quest. Also
podcasts.
On his show Community, they had at least 2 D&D episodes.
Right.
I believe there's at least an episode of it where they play it on Freaks and Geeks, I think.
Oh, okay.
And just this, and also a lot of the stuff on YouTube and Twitch with Critical Role.
Yeah.
And on the Geek and Sundry and a lot of other things that in the recent years of how a lot of nerd culture has become part of the mainstream.
Exactly.
With the Marvel movies, these weird shady comic book characters, being the biggest grossing films in the past several years, we've won in terms of nerds, we've taken over the pop culture. There's now Game of Thrones is a popular TV show, and you would not catch a quote unquote cool person, in the stereotypical cool I'm using my air quotes here, but cool person having the giant cinder block of a book of any of the Game of Thrones books, but now it's the top of pop culture for a lot of people.
Yeah, I've never even thought about Game of Thrones being a nerdy thing. It just seems like a mainstream show that, it doesn't feel like in my mind, it wasn't super secluded in the way that Dungeons and Dragons often is viewed as. But I absolutely agree. It's become more mainstream. And that's part of why someone like me started playing it, because I'm not a super dorky person or nerdy, I guess I should say. I just don't do those sorts of hobbies normally, but I have been doing D&D. Great game. Highly recommended. Recommend it. I'm stoked on my campaign. It's a blast to write a campaign.
Yeah, you're saying you recommend it as if it's something you could just take off the shelf and just start getting at it. Like
that's right. You can't.
Yeah, it's not really a single player experience, really, though, which is unfortunate.
Well, you could go to a comic book shop and start playing.
Yeah.
I mean, I recommend it. That makes no sense, but I recommend it. Well, something else new with me is, as far as like pop culture goes, is I've been playing nonstop this game called Don't Starve.
Oh yeah.
I almost said it again. I keep calling it Just Starve as if it's Just Dance. Just Starve. Which is what I keep doing in the game.
You're confusing it with Just Dance?
No, just the titles.
Okay. Because, I feel like...
Starve.
I don't know, I haven't played Don't Starve in a really long time, but it seemed very far from Just Dance.
It's very far from Just Dance, definitely. But that doesn't stop my brain from continually saying Just Starve when I talk about this game. It's so good. It's, I love so the game's based around survival. You're running around, you operate a character and you're running around trying to survive. And you collect materials, it's a survival kind of game. Collect materials, you make fires.
It's a survival roguelike, one of those, Minecraft-esque kind of
exactly.
Things.
Just
but
like
2D.
Minecraft. Yeah. And as far as, since I've been playing it, I'm getting all these recommendations on the Steam platform about other survival games. It looks like there are a ton out there.
Oh yeah, there are so many.
Yeah. Yeah, and...
Not all of them are good.
Oh yeah.
A lot of them are very, very terrible.
Oh really?
Very, very... A lot of them are in early... I remember seeing I guess it was a picture on a Twitter tweet thing where, I think it was a screenshot of the part of the Steam page where it lists the tags on a game.
Yeah.
Right. And it was I forget how to describe it, but it was it was a picture of, I think it was, roguelike, survival crafting.
Yeah.
And someone's like, oh no, it's the unholy trinity of and early access. What was one of them?
Yeah.
Early access, survival, crafting.
Yeah.
It's oh no, it's one of those games.
Oh really?
Because there's so many of those games of people just, trying to mimic things like Minecraft or Terraria or Don't Starve even.
Yeah.
Where, there are countless, games like that where you're trying to, even on the phone now, even on the iOS and the Android games, where you're some dude stuck somewhere and you need to, with nothing except a shirt off your back maybe, and you gotta survive, you gotta carve out your little shelter, your own little settlement or whatever by punching enough trees and smashing enough rocks to build a radio out of these weird bits and bobs you find on this field of trees or whatever.
Yeah, now that you mention it, I can think of 3 cell phone games that I played that were survival cell phone games that were really bad. Well, Don't Starve does a great job at doing that. I can't put it down. But the problem with the game is that you can't save. I'm sure it's on purpose.
So it's a permadeath game.
Exactly. Yeah. Is that the term for it?
Yeah. No, that's one of the. I don't know the word for it, but it's one of the. What's the word? It's one of the staples of a roguelike game.
Oh, really?
Where it's roguelike? Yeah, it's I think the things that make up a roguelike game nowadays, at least, I think the term has evolved over the past several years, but it's randomly generated. Whether it's the map or it's usually the map. It's permadeath in that you can save scum.
Yeah.
But you're not supposed to.
Right.
You can't. In a Mario game, if you die, you can go back.
Yeah.
You get the 1-ups and stuff like that. But in this one, if you die, you die. Mm-hmm. And, but there's other things that are, less required, but those two tend to be the, big pillars of roguelikes as they're known nowadays.
Oh. Well, I can see why it's a cliche if it is, because I feel like this game does it really well, and I can't put it down. I had to drag myself away from it to go to work a couple times recently. Yeah,
and I remember playing it a bit. I think must have been earlier in its development. It's fully released now, right? It's not.
Oh yeah, it's been out for 7 years, I think. 2011.
I don't...
14?
Yeah, like, I feel like because it's been around for a while, but I don't believe it's been, like, released until, like, maybe at most a couple years ago.
Oh.
Because I think I must have played it when it was still an early access game.
Mm-hmm.
And I sort of, like, bounced off of it. Like, I played it for a bit. I played it for, like, a good chunk of time.
Mm-hmm.
But it was, I don't know, at that time, still too obtuse for me. It's still too difficult to, like, figure out what I was supposed to do, what I could do. Because, it wasn't done yet.
Yeah.
The sanity mechanic was neat.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine that they still have that. I can't imagine them taking that part out, but, like, your character, like, going crazy. If you do certain things or if you don't do certain things.
Yeah.
And that changing the game and that being, in some ways, depending on what you want to do, maybe something you do want to do.
Right.
For whatever benefits here or there or whatever. But at the time, both for me and both where I was and where it was as a game didn't really match with me.
Yeah, fair enough. Why don't we get into talking about what we watched for this week?
Yes. Our main topic for this week is the classic film Citizen Kane by Orson Welles.
Is it by Orson Welles?
Yeah, it's from 1941, I believe. 41. And I'm pretty sure he wrote, directed, and starred as the lead actor in it. Oh,
okay. I knew he starred in it. Yeah, fair enough. That's all. Thanks for listening.
But yeah, like, I had seen it before, years ago, prior to watching it again for this episode. But Joel, this was your first time, watching it. Do you, and you only just finished watching it very recently, prior to recording this.
Yeah.
Do you have any, thoughts just off the top of your head before we dive into a deep discussion about this, 70-year-old movie? Not 70. Is it 70?
Oh man. Yeah, it's getting close to that. Yeah. So, before we get into that, why don't we give a brief synopsis? The idea behind the film is it's about a man, Charles Kane, Charles
Foster Kane.
Right. Who is given a load of money. He becomes incredibly wealthy as a young child, like 11 years old, somewhere around that.
Yeah, like the movie is told not chronologically, which was interesting. But when he was a young boy, his parents, or specifically, I guess, his mother, comes into a large sum of money through some land that was given to them by a boarder who, like, couldn't pay, so he just gave them a deed to some, like, worthless mine, but it turns out to be full of gold or whatever. And the mom sends Kane off to, like, boarding school and under the care of this, like, banker or something, or a lawyer who will watch over his fortune until he comes of age. And do you want to take it from there, or?
Yeah. So he moves out east. I think they said New York.
Yeah, probably New York.
So they take him to New York. And when he's of age to start taking over some of his businesses, the only thing, or some of what his money's been doing while he was a kid, the only thing that he wants to do is take over a newspaper. So the
New York Inquirer.
Yeah, that's right. So he slowly builds up the New York Inquirer until it's a bigger and bigger publication, buys a whole bunch of other publications, basically remains a rich mogul, getting richer and richer until his death. And the driving mystery behind the story is why his last word was Rosebud. He said Rosebud.
The film opens up with a really drawn out, slow zoom in towards his palatial, unfinished mansion.
Yeah. As
he's lying dying in his bedroom. He's clutching. Huh?
It's beyond a mansion. They say it has like a zoo. It's a giant. It's like a Disney World-esque place.
Oh yeah, sure. But I guess at least part of it is a mansion.
Yeah, that's right.
His land encompasses and exceeds a mansion.
Right.
And zooms into his room, and he's clutching a snow globe, and he drops a snow globe, and as the snow globe breaks, he whispers Rosebud, and that's his final word.
Right.
And the movie, as a framing device, follows this reporter who is trying to figure out what this word means. And he does so by interviewing and I guess reading the diaries of people who knew Kane in life.
Right.
Starting with the lawyer and then proceeding to people who knew him more and more intimately.
Yeah.
Do you want to go on with that?
So that's the driving thread. And it isn't until, well, we see his life take on different forms of mostly sadness. He more or less dies an alone old man and resented by his 2 ex-wives.
Well, one of them is dead, so I don't know how much resenting she can do.
Okay, well, she resented him while she was able to. And at the last scene, it's revealed that Rosebud was actually the name of his sled. So his last thoughts before he died were of his sled that he had as a kid right before he was given all this money. So,
and, listeners at home, Joel did not know this prior to watching the movie.
Oh,
right?
yes, I did.
Oh, you did? I thought you mentioned...
It drove me nuts. Because I don't want to start ranting about this. It's Family Guy. I'm sure you out there, you've seen this episode, perhaps. Family Guy, I watched it when I was probably 11. One of the episodes had a joke where Peter reveals the end of this movie and how Rosebud was just a sled. And that stuck with me. I have no idea why. So as soon as I started watching this movie, I knew the ending, and I was so frustrated. So I don't.
No, I thought you before you mentioned you didn't know the movie before. You hadn't.
Yeah, I didn't until the first scene when he says Rosebud. I was like, no, I know the ending.
Well, I think that just puts you in line along with everybody else on the planet who knows what Rosebud is.
Really?
It's one of the most famous twists in film.
Well, I mean...
like, the page on TV Tropes, which is a website I really enjoy. The page for that lists the movies that have a twist, and the twist is widely known. Do you know what the name of that page is? Because they all have a weird, quirky, funny name.
Is it?
Right.
Is it Rosebud?
No, the page is called It Was His Sled.
Oh, no way.
So
this is the second time this has happened to me. Also from Murder on the Orient Express. I did not know that ending.
Yeah, I was hoping to recapture the because it's so rare to see someone who doesn't know the ending of Citizen Kane. Especially, with the Family Guy episode that you mentioned.
Yeah.
And even before that, that was not the first show, property, whatever, to underscore or address how widely known that twist was.
Right.
Right. Oh, but you're saying that, when you realized that you knew the twist, that it sort of spoiled your experience?
It did and it didn't, and that always happens with twist endings like this. If I didn't know it and I heard the ending, I would want to go back and rewatch it and think about how that's related to what's going on. Whenever there's a twist ending, suddenly you have a new perspective and it's a whole new movie. I just never had the mystery perspective. I never had the experience of not knowing what the ending is. So it was interesting enough to think about the references to sleds in it, all the talk about having money and what it means to be happy without money, with money. So I still had a rich viewing of it. I just love mysteries in stories. I love seeing it how it was meant to be seen or read. So that's what was disappointing.
I think it's I don't know. I don't know how much if you're watching it as a mystery, then I could see knowing the solution to the mystery or what have you, that it was his sled, could spoil that for you, I guess.
As if the sled was the murderer.
Yeah. But I remember reading some arguments that that's not the best angle to view the movie as, because I will say, this is the second time I've seen it.
Yeah.
The first time I watched it, I think I watched it pretty shortly after I finished grade 12 or something. So it was a couple years ago. And I watched it and I didn't really care. It didn't really do anything for me.
Oh.
It was because I myself have trouble getting into old movies.
Right.
I don't know if it's the pacing. I don't know if it's it being in black and white. I don't know if it's just the weird way they talk.
Yeah, you mean the transatlantic accent?
Not even that, but they structure sentences differently.
Really?
In the past.
Well, in the movie past, right? In Hollywood.
Well, sure, but in the movie past, and they also have different not dialects, different vocabularies. It's a more I don't know, precise, a more fancy,
Flowery,
I guess, yeah, way of speaking. Whereas, I guess, these days people are more, I don't know, to the point. I don't know. But whatever it is, I've always had an issue, a difficulty with watching or getting into older movies. I might have mentioned this in our previous classical movie episode.
Yeah, you did.
When we were talking about Rebel Without a Cause. But watching it again now that I'm a bit older and have a bit more, I don't know, context for the movie, a bit more academic training to disassemble a given work or whatever, I was able to enjoy it a bit more. Like, there were some jokes that I noticed in this viewing that I did not catch in my first viewing. Probably because I was like half looking at my phone because I was bored in my first viewing.
A teenager?
Huh?
Were you a teenager at the time?
I don't know, however old I was, just after grade 12. So probably.
Oh, I thought you said in high school.
Oh, I don't know. It was somewhere around grade 12, might have been. Anyway, but yeah, I noticed a lot more of the like Gilligan cuts. I don't know what the fancy term of it, but on Gilligan's Island, you know, Gilligan's like, oh, I will like, and then they need him to wear a dress for like a disguise or something.
Yeah.
And he's like, I will not wear a dress. You will never get me in the dress. And there's a cut and he's wearing the dress.
Right. And it's like, da, 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 da.
Yeah. And I noticed stuff like that in Citizen Kane that I did not notice the first time I watched it. Like in the scene where I believe it's after he marries his second wife, Susan Alexander, the singer. Mm-hmm. And as they're right before they drive away in the carriage or whatever, he's talking to a reporter and he's like, oh, she'll be singing at the Met or whatever. That's a musical place, right? The Met or...
I think so.
And if not, I'll build her own theater, but it won't come to that. And then the next frame is like one of those like, spinning newspapers where the Kane builds his own theater for Susan Alexander or something, you know. So like that was...
So it was funny.
Funny, not the kind of funny I guess I was looking for when I was in grade 12.
Totally.
But something I could appreciate more now that I'm an older person.
Yeah. Right.
But yeah, no, tell me more about your experience being it your first time watching this film.
I also find it hard to get into older films, and for the same reasons you're mentioning. And I mentioned this to someone I work with today, and I said, we're doing classic movies, and she's like, oh, I find those boring. And I think that's just it in a nutshell. We're used to a different level of excitement. And pacing for sure. Yeah, everything's moving quicker but also, like you said, using our language and using the language of Hollywood, perhaps, that we're more used to now. So in that way, it's always hard to watch. You have to be prepared to be patient. That's what I found for myself. I can really appreciate it though. I still like watching these films because I always go back to thinking about what the people who made this were thinking at the time. And that relates to one of the themes that I think I saw in this movie, if you don't mind if I can get into themes. It's that it seems to me, to be drawing attention to the protagonists in a movie like this. It seemed to be a critique of the Hollywood protagonist, which at this time would be like, the white man. It's always a white man they're following in these sorts of movies. And it's the same thing in this, but this movie is all about Citizen Kane. Obviously, it's called Citizen Kane. It's about his life. It's about a bunch of people trying to figure out everything about his life. And throughout his life, he's never happy. Despite not being a really evil person, there comes a point where he does bad things. Like, for instance, hitting Susan. That's outright bad, and that's the catalyst for her finally leaving him.
Is it, though? I don't believe that that's the catalyst. And also, like, I'm not sure how...
well, hold on.
Oh, sorry, go on.
He's never outright evil. He seems like the protagonist, and yet we don't cheer for him. We watch his life slowly fall apart, and in that way, I think it seems to be critiquing how we look to a protagonist to cheer for and to look for a good story from. But in this one, we get a sad story that's not even necessarily a sad story of an evil character. It's of a person who's been corrupted by something that perhaps was even out of his control to some extent. See, I'm not sure if I even agree with that 100%, but what were you going to say?
Yeah, like, I don't know if I would agree that Kane hitting his wife towards the end of the movie was the catalyst that made her choose to leave him towards later on in the movie.
It was the final straw. No?
I don't believe it was. And also, I don't know how in the time period, how weird it would be if a man struck his wife. Mm-hmm. 'Cause that was, further in the past than the movie was made in.
Right. So we're thinking, 30s at least?
At least, yeah. Or I think they say, how, the time difference between her leaving him and then him dying years later, or whatever. But, yeah, let's say in the 30s. So, I don't know how acceptable it was for a man to slap his wife in an argument or whatever. But I don't know if I would say that, or it's an argument could be made that the main character is actually the reporter. Thompson, I think his name is, who is the framing narrative basically of diving into Kane's life.
Yeah.
'Cause while he is following Kane historically, Kane isn't, while the reporter is following Kane, historically, the reporter is the one who's making all this stuff happen.
Right.
In a narrative sense, or in a, agency sense. Or I don't know. But, also I think your interpretation of Kane is heavily weighted towards the older Kane. Right, whereas, would you say the same thing about the young Kane?
That he's a good person? Or
that he's a evil person he does bad, horrible things.
Well, I never see him painted as a Gaston sort of character.
How do you mean by that?
Someone who is clearly the antagonist.
Okay. Weird choice of reference, but okay, go ahead.
Really? Well, to me, he's just he's boisterous, and he's mean to Belle, and he's mean to the beast, and he wants to kill the beast. He seems to do every evil thing. Well, not every evil thing.
Okay, go on.
So we're given a protagonist who I wanted to root for, but that turned out to have a crappy life. So it was sad in that way. So it drew my attention to the fact that I'm always cheering for the main character. It took me off guard halfway through. This is when I started to think about this. When his friend Jebediah said...
Leland, the arts editor, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's also his college friend. They came back to the paper together to restart it together. He comes up to Kane drunk and tells him, basically, you use people and you don't really want a genuine relationship. You just think you can buy people. And that's similar to what Susan says later on. But it was at that point that I realized that we're not really following a good person if this is what he's doing. So that point made me question, why am I cheering for this person? And I think because I hadn't really seen that side of him. It's not really shown in the movie.
I don't know. I feel like a lot of the bad things he does are too unintentional to call him a bad person.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, see, that's just it. He's not Gaston. He's
You're still sticking to that. Okay, let's run with it.
It's he's given this money and that leads to bad things, and it makes you question whether he was he's evil. Well, he's just not.
Yeah, no, he addresses this himself specifically, explicitly, him saying, in one of the first set of flashbacks when the reporter is reading the lawyer's diaries or whatever, towards the end of that chunk when Kane is signing away the newspaper.
Yeah.
He says to the lawyer, I wrote this down, if I hadn't been very rich, I might have been a very great man.
Right.
And then when the lawyer asks, what would you have been? And Kane says, like, everything you hate.
Right.
You know, so he acknowledges that the money made him do bad things.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
Right.
But that was the one of the few instances where I saw him, or like where the movie shows him being self-reflective.
Right.
Whereas almost all the other times, it's someone... I also wrote this down, like, I wrote down, everyone seems to know more about him than he does.
Right.
You know, everyone having these, like, weird, like, pithy, like, one-liners.
Yeah.
About, like, of, like, teaching him a lesson, or like, trying to teach him a lesson.
Totally.
In a very, like, theatrically apropos way, or, like, very, like, grand, well-spoken, well-orchestrated way.
Oh, yeah. It's, like, 40s Hollywood.
Sure, but, like...
With a transatlantic accent.
I don't know, like, even when the reporter is talking to his manager, I guess, I think it might have been the guy after him looking at the book, the guy who's in the desk, you know, who's like, I'm the CEO, I have nothing but time.
Yeah.
That guy. He also had a very, like, well-worded, almost prepared answer for one of the questions that the reporter asks him.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's one thing I noted, is that everything seems too snippy to be real. Not snippy, but instant. The way they talk to each other.
They're quick on their feet in terms of words.
Yeah, like one person says something, they respond immediately, which isn't impossible, but you just have to be a really sharp person, and they all seem just really sharp when it comes to that.
Although, in one part where it wasn't, was when Thatcher, the lawyer guy, I remember I wrote his name down, of, like, the extended scene of him just reading out headlines at the camera.
I don't remember that.
It was towards, like, the
beginning?
The beginning. During when the reporter was reading his diary. And I guess he wrote these all down, I guess, in his diary.
Oh, yeah.
But him just, or it might have been when the reporter was talking to the manager, business partner guy, of Thatcher, just a montage of Thatcher just reading a headline, like, in disbelief.
Oh, okay.
And just, like, glaring at the camera for, like, and there were, like, 20 of those in a row. I'm like, okay, wow.
Yeah, he did look straight at the camera, too. That was
several times.
Stuff. Yeah.
Just, like, in a rage, just, like, angrily reading a headline. And just, like, what is he writing all this down in his diary? Like,
so, what you said about everyone critiquing him, that's what made me, that's also what made me think of this as a critique on cheering for this kind of protagonist. Because it's like, he seems like a pretty decent person, at least to start with. And then everyone around him starts to be like, hey, you're an asshole. You're an asshole. And I'm like, oh, geez, maybe this guy's an asshole.
But I mean, like, one thing I noticed that I didn't really notice in my first viewing was that the movie opens up, basically, like, outside of the Rosebud scene.
Yeah.
It opens up with basically a summary of the movie.
Yeah,
you know,
that's
like,
true.
Like how they tell you in a high school essay to say what you're going to talk about.
Yeah.
This movie basically does that with the newsreel of, like, just a quick overview of his life.
Yeah.
You know, like, of his entire life and all the beats that they're going to hit in the movie.
Right.
You know, and that sort of paints him as a, like, not as a great figure.
Yeah.
You know, of, like, sometimes he supports someone, sometimes he denounces them, sometimes he supports them, then denounces him, and then they're showing him, like, shaking hands with Hitler or something, you know? Like,
it did show Hitler. I didn't see him, though. It
shows him, like, on a balcony, standing beside Hitler.
Oh, yeah?
Like,
I wasn't sure. I guess it was the start of the movie.
Yeah, in, like, the very beginning, like I said, after the Rosebud scene, as part of the newsreel of him, and it was matched up with him saying, like, of the announcer saying, you know, like, sometimes he supports someone and then denounces them.
You know what? This was 1941, so the war ended in 45. This was during the war. They didn't know as much about Hitler as we know now. That's a really interesting part, isn't it? Like, they're looking at Hitler probably as not a great person, but maybe not, like, as we know him, probably the most evil person in modern history.
I'm sure they knew enough about Hitler to know he was a bad guy in the context of the movie.
Yeah, I guess that's a pretty big subject to get into. Yeah, sorry, go on.
But yeah, and then they also talk about how his mansion, Xanadu, named after this poem. Its price, uncountable, you know, like, it has 2 of every animal, you know, this man who's bigger than life, you know, and his crumbling mansion, like, already falling apart before it's being built. Mm-hmm. You know, like, it doesn't paint him as this, like, heroic figure. Like, the Rosebud scene, which is what I'm going to keep calling it, I guess, the scene of him
dying. Oh, okay.
At best paints him it paints him neutrally. There's maybe a bit of sympathy because this guy just died,
Yeah.
That paints him at best sympathetically, if not neutrally, right? And then the very next scene is this newsreel that does paint him as like a notorious, mover of worlds, basically, who's I think one of the title cards during the newsreel was his name was more recognized than any name put into his paper or something like that.
Oh yeah.
How he was more well known than the people he wrote about because of how how often he'd throw his weight around.
Yeah.
And towards the end of the movie, the butler says, oh yeah, the trains don't like waiting for people, but there was a time where they would have waited all day if Kane told them to, or something like that, So he did throw his weight around, and we see that throughout the movie, more towards his older years, but of him, particularly the most evidence with his scenes involving his second wife, Susan Alexander, the singer, of him, forcing her against her will to be an opera singer.
Right.
Based on an offhanded mention that she makes when they first meet of oh, I enjoy singing. Yeah. And I will make you a star.
Well, don't get me wrong. I mean, I think that is pushing that point that he's not a good person at that point in the movie. But it was up until the point where Jebediah confronts him when he's drunk that I realized, that at that point I realized this is not, he's not being painted as the best person. Because yes, he throws his weight around, but he still, in my mind, was an important person who, famous people are loved and hated. I just accepted that.
But I mean, even in the movie, I believe, up until that point, you are supposed to sympathize. He is not a bad person up until that point.
Right.
That was one of the things that, I did some reading about the movie. In terms of research or whatever. But one thing I saw was that you can't, in his newspaper days, in his younger days, when he was 20 or whatever, 25, when he's still freshly running the newspaper, he's very idealistic. He's very, for the people.
Yeah.
That was the entire point of the, declaration of intent or whatever, that thing he writes.
Yeah. And he also mentions, I think at that point, that he wants to run for governor to help people.
Yeah.
And be president, he even says.
But that gets pretty close to when he takes a turn. But, when he's writing his, declaration of intent, or whatever, scribbling it on that piece of, newsprint, and, printing it in his papers, that's around when he's the most idealistic, version of himself.
Yeah.
And, he's the voice of the little guy.
Yeah.
And so on. And one of the interesting things I read that Red pointed out was that you can't really pinpoint any particular thing that changed him.
Yeah.
Because there's a part where Leland says, after he buys the entire board of trustees or whatever from his competing paper, which was a neat power play.
Yeah.
And he was, and got them to pose in the exact same order, I guess, that they were in the other photo.
Exactly. Same lighting.
But in that scene, or during the party scene, Leland mentions he's worried about these executives changing Kane.
Right.
And we don't really see that happen. And so we can't pinpoint that as, there isn't a scene of Slugworth whispering in his ear to reference the old Charlie and the Chocolate Factory of you should do this. There's no
There's another antagonist. He's evil. He's painted that way.
Yeah, and there's no singular scene of a devil in his shoulder.
Right.
Pulling him towards this path of darkness or whatever.
Yeah.
And although there are several chances for him to make a better decision or be a better man that he doesn't pick. The scene when he is running for governor, and immediately after the rally, and his wife, he finds out his wife is going to visit his the lady friend that he met previously that will eventually become his second wife. And then they confront his campaign opponent, who is threatening to reveal the allegedly sordid love affair that he may or may not be having with this, I don't know, lady with a toothache that he met several weeks before.
Basically a young woman, a young mistress.
Yeah, although I think it's explicitly stated that there is nothing going on between them.
Yeah.
But that the opponent will imply that there is.
Yeah.
And that Kane can either pull out of the race or have this be plastered all over the headlines.
Mm-hmm.
And it's presented that if he was the better man, or if he was more okay with losing, or whatever, or whatever, that he would step out of the race and live his life with his wife and child. But in that moment, he decides to just double down. And this is something I didn't catch when I was watching it the first time, right? Because in the overview, we see the headline that the political opponent says he will write if you don't do this, right? So if you remember back, you know what he's going to do. And now you have the context of how stupid a decision, or like how preventable it was, or whatever. And how he just doubles down on, nope, I said I was going to do this. I will not fail. You know, I will not let you tell me what to do.
Yeah. So he's rich and determined and fights hard, and he still slowly ends up losing, more or less. He loses all his friends. He dies alone, literally. And yeah, it is a slow unravel. I think that's why I'm sort of having trouble of what to make of it specifically. I mean, I want to avoid a theme or a thesis that the movie is suggesting that money causes unhappiness, because it's not necessarily even that. It's not bad choices. It's not even like cheating, like specific bad choices, because he doesn't do that. It's a slow unravel.
Yeah, like I think there's a lot of different messages or whatever you can take out of the movie. Like, and I will admit, you know, I continue to stand on the shoulders of giants by referencing things I've read about this.
Yeah.
But like, you could read it as, you know, like money doesn't buy happiness. You could read it as if you take his dying words being Rosebud, and him dying alone in his empty mansion. You know, his money, his vast riches hasn't bought him happiness. You know, you could read it as if you have a particular fondness for the reporter's final monologue at the end of the movie, that where the reporter says, you know, I don't know what Rosebud is, but even if I did, I don't know if it would help. You know, of saying like one word can't sum up a man's life.
Yeah.
You know. Or you could read it as childhood is wasted on the young, or how the older he gets, the more unhappy he gets. So inversely, the younger he is, the happier he is. Or it could be about what is it? Like he didn't die alone. He was still holding the snow globe that belonged to his second wife, Susan Alexander. So he was like holding on to her. And
the memory of the young.
The memory, like those are the two things he had with him when he died. His childhood memory of his beloved sled, and also the woman who I think she even says like everything was something he decided to do except me leaving him. You know.
Yeah.
It's so it's there's a lot of different things you could read into the movie.
I love the idea that you said that someone's whole life can't be summed up in one word. That's actually what I thought about the newsreel at the beginning, where you said it gives us a preview of what we're about to see. The reporter makes, or not the reporter, but maybe the person who put the newsreel together, or someone watching it, says that that doesn't sum up everything. We need to find out what his last word was, or why he said this thing right before he died.
Yeah, I think they talk about how it's just like a cold overview. They want more like personality to it. Yeah.
And that made me think, similar to the idea that Rosebud can't sum someone up. A 5-minute newsreel can't sum someone up. It takes, and maybe that's why it's not pointing to one specific case where this leads to his downfall, because there's not one thing. It's a whole life of events that just happened to turn out this way.
Yes. And I guess now would be a good time to transition to talking about, like, the, apparently groundbreaking technological stuff that the movie did.
Oh, were they groundbreaking?
No, that's one of the things, that's why it holds up so well.
Yeah.
So whatever.
Well, I noticed a lot of interesting camera angles and effects and the models that they used to get different angles.
Yeah, like there was a lot of stuff that they did in the movie that have, and this is one of my disappointments, I guess, with the movie, in that, same with Seinfeld, but that Citizen Kane and, by example, Seinfeld were so good at doing what they did that the innovations that they came up with have become the standard.
Oh, okay.
So it doesn't look special anymore. So all the good pieces, all the good innovations, all the parts that stood out about Citizen Kane were cherry-picked and became the standard. For
Seinfeld. I'm kidding.
For Seinfeld and for a bunch of other, for every movie, basically.
Oh, yeah?
Of the modern era, that it doesn't look special anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like if there's a painting that was the first time anyone used the color purple, and it did so well that every other painting from then on used the color purple in some way, that first one doesn't look as flashy anymore.
Absolutely.
Because it's become the standard. Every painting has purple. Of course. Why wouldn't a painting have purple?
Yep.
You know?
Yeah, which calls back to why it's hard to watch these movies and why they seem mundane, because what was once innovative is now standard.
Yeah, and I remember, there's a lot of scenes. One of the innovations, apparently, that, from what I understand, that they had in the movie was using, I forget what they called it. I believe it's a long angle lens or whatever the lens is called, that made it so that they could have things both in the foreground and in the background in focus.
Oh, okay.
So and they do that to do a lot of, in a couple places, to do some, visual tricks. In the scene towards the beginning when Kane is signing away his newspaper, towards the end of the lawyer section. The part where he says, if I wasn't rich, I would have been a great man or something. Immediately prior to that, he turns away from the camera and starts walking towards a window in the background. And it's still in focus. So you imagine it's not too far away. And that is a normal sized window. But as he continues to walk, he just shrinks more and more. Yeah. So he's just this tiny man beside this giant window. Because it's not, much bigger and further away than you expected it to be. And there's a lot of discussion about that being a visual metaphor of him being a small man or whatever. And similar with the fireplace towards the end of the movie, of it just being a giant, bus-sized fireplace.
Yeah. There was one point where they were talking to Jebediah as an old man, which also the special effects to make these young actors look old. That was really neat too.
Yeah, some of them landed better than others.
Absolutely. This one actually, I think, didn't land super well. Jed is what they'd call him. That when he was sitting there, at one point it became very evident that the background looks strange. And I thought it was a blue screen of some sort or a canvas painting. But then all of a sudden, and probably because it's all in focus, all of a sudden, two nurses come walking down it. And I realized this is a real life
a set
background,
an area.
It's a hall behind him, right? Yeah, that was a really interesting effect. I don't know if I've seen that in many other films in the same way.
Yeah, and also interesting about, Leland is,
In Leland, you're referring to?
Jebediah Leland.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure what to call him, because sometimes they refer to him by his first name, sometimes by his last name.
Yeah, all of a sudden, about halfway through, I realized there was a Jebediah all of a sudden. It was like, oh, that's okay.
But apparently, in the movie, he's very strongly coded as gay.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and, I didn't catch that either. But apparently to the audience, he is very obviously gay.
Huh.
And the reason that is, or the reason that was clear at the time was because of the Hays Code. Are you familiar with the Hays Code?
Oh, when everything's hazy except for his, am I on the right track?
No, not at all.
No, I could tell from your face. Blanks there.
The Hays Code was a filmmaking law, I don't know, some kind of, order from on high about filmmaking that sanitized everything.
Yeah.
It was the whole, two people can't sleep in the same bed, even if they're married. That's why, I Love Lucy, even though, Lucy and Ricky Ricardo are a married couple, they sleep in separate beds that are 5 feet apart from each other.
Yeah, and we saw it in Rebel Without a Cause, too.
Yeah, in Rebel Without a Cause, and how, if there's a romantic scene on a bed, in a bedroom, they had to at least have 1 foot on the floor.
Really?
So that's why there ended up just being a lot of like makeout scenes where someone just has their foot on the floor also, just like hanging off the bed. As a like, I don't know, moral panic, the moral guardians didn't want the like corruption of film to affect society.
Yeah.
Right. So there's very like strict moral codes. That's the word I'm looking for. Moral codes in terms of what you can and cannot show on TV or on film. I'm sorry. There's no swearing. You can't show death. You can't have the bad guys win. I mentioned that briefly in the discussion about Thelma and Louise in one of our earlier episodes.
Right.
Where the bad guys can't win, or the people who commit a crime can't win. And that meant that they couldn't explicitly describe Jebediah Leland as something as corrupting as him being gay or whatever. But they could hint at it. Yeah. And I don't know. Apparently, like, him being a theater critic was supposed to be one of the major clues.
What? And
I guess him smoking cigars or something, I don't know.
What?
Were supposed to be like clues, like, oh, this guy's totally gay or whatever. But
that's so over my head. I don't get that at all.
Yeah, no, I didn't catch it either. But in some of the reading I did, like, that was it was supposed to be implied that in the early days of that they cover, like around when they first buy the paper. Mm-hmm. That Leland is maybe like a little bit infatuated with Kane. And when I read that, I was like, oh, that's not something I had noticed at all. But that adds an interesting context, subtext, whatever, to their interactions.
Yeah.
Another, to go back to camera angles, I guess, in one of the early, in one of my classes, in one of the film classes I took, we looked at Citizen Kane, of course, because it's a film class. How could we not talk about Citizen Kane? But in particular, the scene of Kane's parents in the cabin, and when the mom is signing Kane away, basically, for the better life he's going to have now that they're insanely wealthy. Yeah,
well, she is. The husband is strictly not, or decidedly not.
Right. And I didn't really catch why until I read about it, but apparently it's because the dad apparently beats Kane every once in a while.
I picked up on that.
But the blocking on the scene of the positioning of the actors and of where Kane is and how that all works together was the topic of this discussion, and how for the entire scene, except for maybe 5 or 10 seconds here and there, Kane is always in frame in the very back, visible in the window outside, and it's in between these two, in terms of scale and camera space, huge forces of his father and on one side, and his mother and the lawyer Thatcher on the other side,
right? Basically
arguing about his future.
Yeah,
in this tug of war with him in the middle, him literally in the middle of the frame.
Oh yeah,
or more in the middle. I think is middle left or whatever. But anyway, effectively in the middle, and they're playing this tug of war while he's blissfully playing in the snow with Rosebud,
right?
In the background, and how at the start of the scene it shows it's a close up of the camera is basically you don't see the window, the frame of the window. You're basically looking out the window, and then it pulls out, and the window slowly shrinks as it pans out. But it's always there, and there's a part where after the father basically loses the argument, goes to the window to shut the window, and you could read into that as a futile attempt to separate Kane and protect him from this lawyer or whatever, depending on how you want to read into it. And then I mentioned this in a previous episode about specifically about mystery stories, and whether how I prefer mystery stories that are quote unquote fair. You know what I mean? Where they give you enough clues to figure it out yourself.
Oh, okay. There's not a Deus Ex Machina at the end?
Or not that, but I mean it's fair in terms of clues.
Okay.
Right? Where if you're observant enough, whatever that means, you could figure it out.
Yeah.
Compared to where in some mystery stories or whatever, like a Sherlock Holmes thing, he waltzes through the room, pulls out a burnt piece of paper from the fireplace, looks at it, doesn't show you the viewer, looks at it, slips it in his pocket, and runs away.
Right.
And then solves the mystery.
Yeah.
And you can't keep up because you don't know what the piece of paper says.
Right.
You know, whereas a fair one would be one where where you get as good a look at the clues as the detective does or whatever.
Right.
You know, and I was wondering if, because, you know, I knew, me and everyone else on the planet knows the twist, that it was his sled. So I was wondering if outside of the very, very final shot of the sled burning up in the furnace, if we do get a shot of the sled being Rosebud, or seeing the name of the sled, or seeing the picture of a rosebud on the sled. And while there are a lot of shots of the sled, in his childhood, like there is the like time lapse or whatever shot of the sled being covered up by snow.
Yeah.
To show time passing. We don't really get a clear shot of the sled, except for a brief second or half a second of immediately after the signing the paper scene inside the cabin when the parents and Thatcher come out and Kane is playing with a snowman or something. And Kane uses the sled to push Thatcher away.
Oh, yeah.
And for a brief moment, you see a picture, the design on the sled.
The rose.
It's not close enough to like read what the writing says, but you can see. That's the clearest shot you get, and that's clear enough to see that there's a picture on it. You don't care at the moment because it's some shitty sled.
Yeah.
You know, who cares what the picture on the sled is?
Yeah.
You don't know that that's important to anybody.
So then, is this an unfair mystery, this element of this movie?
I'd say it's fair enough.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too.
But what I'm keying in on, or like the part that you could argue makes it an important thing, is that the one scene you do see a clear shot of the picture prior to the reveal. You know, is when Kane, young Kane, he's like what, 8, 11? I don't know.
Somewhere around there.
Is using this sled to shove away this life-changing thing.
The representation of money, perhaps?
Yeah, the representation of this fortune that he, in his own words, years later, he describes as something that made him not a great man.
Right.
And like that's the scene where you see the rosebud, you know, him forcibly resisting this bountiful fortune or whatever that is being presented at his feet.
Yeah, I think that this movie, knowing that ending, it was frustrating at first because I thought I thought it would play more like a mystery, and that's a boring mystery, and it's a simple idea that a childhood toy is what he's thinking of on his deathbed. And I think that's why people get so annoyed by this movie. Like, I had just heard a friend said of a friend that she called the movie, like, stupid. It was about the guy's sled. And that was basically all of her thoughts about it. And, like, yes, in that way, it's very obvious and it's trite, but there's a lot more to that. And to me, it's unfortunate that it has this ending because there's so much more that goes on in the movie.
I feel like part of what made me appreciate the movie more in this viewing is that, one, I was paying more attention to it.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I wasn't like checking my phone every like 30 seconds.
You wanted to be there, I would imagine.
But was that I was able to notice how often he or like, I don't know about often, but like there are a couple points where once you know what he's talking about, that he is referencing the sled or like wanting to reconnect with his childhood. Like in specifics, in the scene where he first meets Susan Alexander.
Yeah.
When she has the toothache and he gets splattered with mud off screen, and then she starts laughing at him.
Yeah.
And he is furious, but then delighted that she doesn't recognize him.
Yeah.
And like likes him for who he is, and not because he's insanely wealthy and insanely powerful. But, and I could be wrong about this, but prior to like walking her to her place and getting cleaned up, he mentions that he was on his way to a West Manhattan warehouse that he had a bunch of his old stuff in it.
Right.
And they don't say more about it, but that's, I assume that must be a clue, or must be a reference to, cause I think the way I forget exactly how he phrases it, but he was saying something about like, oh, I wanted to, go to this old West Manhattan warehouse and wax nostalgic for a bit, or something like that.
Oh.
So that leads me to believe that if he hadn't run into, Susan Alexander, he might have, I don't know, had time to reminisce over his sled.
That's interesting.
And reconnect with his childhood or whatever.
Yeah, and that could be another thread that's tying us together is serendipity or fate, that all these events were just meant to happen. And a negative reading of that could be he was meant to have a sad life. I wouldn't want to watch a movie, or, read it as that. I feel like there's more to it than that.
At the beginning of this, you mentioned that once you realized that you already knew the twist, that you were disappointed.
Yeah.
Do you think that affected, are you able to put into words any effect that might have had on your viewing of the movie?
Well, I think I already have, more or less, in that it was immediately disappointing, but then I realized that there's more to this movie, there's more to every movie than its ending. And there's a reason why we want to rewatch most movies with a twist ending, because the next reading becomes more interesting, the next viewing becomes more interesting, because what they're talking about. So it didn't destroy it in my mind. It was still worth watching. Although at the same time, there was a point about halfway through when I just thought, I'm just not very interested in Citizen Kane, in Kane as a character. I'm not really interested in seeing a really rich person just spend money on stuff. And I'm glad it didn't go that way completely. It was about the drunk scene again that made me sort of change my mind on that.
The drunk scene was after he finds out he lost the election.
No. Oh yes, that's right. Oh, so it actually was before that. But it didn't seem to be going anywhere. It was just following this guy who's, I got the point that it was about his life. I wasn't very interested. I forget where I'm going with this.
You weren't really impressed.
Yeah.
It wasn't really grabbing you partway through?
Yeah, I suppose so. So that was disappointing to think that this is just leading up to him wanting his sled. But it obviously, because in regards to what we're talking about, it got more interesting than just that.
But I think one thing I realized, I guess, in this more recent viewing that I've viewed it in, was that it's about more than just the sled, right? That's the catalyst, that's the instigating action of him having the sled be his dying words and them wanting to find out what the context of that was. Mm-hmm. But, and again, this is, Shoulders of Giants, this is based on something I read, that the sled, the reporter mentioned this in his monologue of even if we did find out about the sled, that wouldn't really tell us much about him as a person.
Yes.
And also how Kane, as public a figure as he was, he basically owned the newspaper industry as we're led to believe, at his prime, and was, the title card said in the news thing, his name was more famous than any name he put into his paper. Mm-hmm. How he was able to have a secret die with him.
Oh yeah.
That, something private, this beloved childhood sled.
Yeah.
That was worth nothing. In the appraising scene when the reporters are picking over his Ark of the Covenant warehouse style belongings.
Yeah.
Of here's a Venus de Milo, it's worth $10 billion, and here's a oven from his childhood home worth maybe $2.
Yeah, that's right. And they're there's another sled, throw it in the fire.
And how thinking back to the thing I mentioned about him, when he meets Susan Alexander, how he was maybe on his way to the warehouse to maybe play with the sled again.
Yeah. And
how that might have set him on a different path. How, when he dies, he does have the sled. It's part of his vast hoarder warehouse palace of all his belongings.
He physically has it.
Yeah. Well, I guess physically, I would imagine, he doesn't, have it with him, but he does have it.
Yeah, he could go get it.
Yeah, he could go get it. Although I don't know if it'd be safe for him to, navigate his piles and piles of garbage.
He's got Butler. For all intents and purposes, he could hug this sled if he wanted to.
So, he does have it.
Yeah.
And he's still dying alone and unhappy.
Yeah.
Without it in his arms. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, maybe even if he didn't meet Susan Alexander and had gone to the warehouse to, I don't know, longingly gaze at his childhood that he lost because of his vast fortune, would that have done anything? Because, we don't really know. The last we see of him, really. We don't know what happens between him smashing the room and walking out. Between that and him lying in bed and dropping a snow globe and dying.
Right.
We don't know what happens. Maybe he spent that entire time just staring in madness at his childhood sled and like stewing and like in a roiling pot of like self-loathing and regret. Or I don't know, maybe he tried to buy more statues or whatever. We don't know.
Well, there seems to be some regret tied into that. He's thinking about the life that he had before he had anything.
Sure, and like there is some time that does pass between his second wife leaving, Susan Alexander leaving him, and him dying. It was at least a couple years. I think like 10 years maybe.
Yeah, he was balder and heavier. He looked physically different.
Sure. We don't really get that many clear shots of him.
Yeah.
After that. After his wife leaves him, or after he like trashes the room or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a number of years.
Mm-hmm.
So like he could have done a number of things.
Yeah.
Like was he just literally clutching that snow globe the entire 10 years or whatever? Like, cause that's I think us not being shown it means it's irrelevant to the movie or whatever, irrelevant to the story. But now I'm curious now that I've realized that there's this huge like possibly useful chunk of time.
Yeah.
Was he just like a continuously slow spiral of depression of him just like staring at the snow globe, saying rosebuds, staring at the snow globe some more and lying in bed?
Well, his butler says that he only heard him say it twice, and it was the 2 times that we saw. So at least he probably wasn't like doing specifically that going out of his mind, I guess.
Because 10 years is a really long time to try and find the sled in your vest.
And yeah, so it implies that he probably wasn't looking for it. I got the feeling that he just accepted sadness and just sat there more or less for 10 years. But
let's say it is 10 years.
Yeah.
So in this 10-year gap, he says that starts and ends with him saying rosebud. He doesn't decide to try and find because when he's walking out of that room, all of his staff is there.
Mm-hmm.
For some reason. I guess they heard the commotion and wanted to see what's going on.
Yeah.
But that's a lot of people.
Yeah, I was surprised by that.
He has a huge staff.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe proportionately to this area of land he owns. Maybe it's not that big, but that is, by most measures, a lot of staff.
And we're talking like 30 people?
Yeah.
Maybe?
30, maybe 40. A good number of people.
Yeah.
Like, more than a handful.
Mm-hmm.
Like a
gaggle.
A gaggle. That's how you measure the help, right? A gaggle of help. But, like, if he really wanted to, he could have tasked everybody with, like, find me my childhood sled.
Well, yeah, and I think that's the point, is he could, but he doesn't. And there's something to it's this private memory. He likes the things that aren't public and famous about him. Like, he likes Susan initially because she doesn't know who he is, and maybe he likes this private memory because he doesn't share it with anyone, and he's proven to himself that he has enough objects. It's just the memory that he's coming back to.
But does he cherish that memory of his sled because it's private, or because it was like from a simpler time? Or because maybe he just really liked that sled. I don't know. Like,
it could be all those things.
Could be all of those. It could be a combination. It could be none of those.
Yeah.
And I think that's sort of what the movie is getting at, in that we don't really know anything about the internal, like, of all the people that I'm sounding really smart right now. Mm-hmm. Of all the people that the reporter, Thompson, that was his name. That's what we decided his name was, right? Thompson? Let's say it's Thompson.
Sure.
Of all the people he interviews, the person he is not able to interview is Kane himself.
Right.
Obviously, because he's dead. This is a posthumous film revolving around the death of this character. So all the views we get of Citizen Kane are outside views that are very, like, weirdly well-informed about his flaws in retrospect. But outside views nonetheless. We don't, have the words from the horse's mouth, so to speak, of what Kane was actually feeling.
Yeah.
And I guess that's what the movie is saying. We can't.
Yeah, we could go find the sled and be like, this belonged to him when he was a kid.
Mystery solved.
Yeah, but no one can know how he was feeling. That was his own private thing. He didn't have to buy it from anyone in the way that like Susan and Jebediah call him out for basically buying people's emotions. With this, it's just his. No one else can find it or take it or do anything with it. And even after he's dead, right? They still can't figure out what it means. They just burn the sled. No one will ever know.
Yeah, and it's sort of like, it's sort of made clear that his dying words are pretty widely known.
Yeah.
In that everybody who the reporter asks about, or effectively everybody, is like, oh, you're here about his last words, huh? Rosebud, I heard about that in the papers. You know? Like, right. I was there. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So, like, it's a pretty infamous phrase, Rosebud, by the time the reporter is asking about it.
Right.
So, like, I would imagine that the I don't know, the teamster, the custodian guy who does throw it into the fire should be aware of the significance of that phrase.
Oh, yeah.
You know, like, like the way he's holding it, he should be able to see it on the sled. You know, the way he's holding it, he would be facing the painted side of the sled, you know, like.
He picks it up like, garbage.
If only I knew how to read. No, but
let's make Citizen Kane 2, where the janitor saves the day and writes a play about Citizen Kane's real life centered around the sled.
They interview the sled, you know, like tell me the inside story about Charles Foster Kane. Yeah, I think we should touch on the like other characters, the narrators, a bit, right?
I think we should wrap it up pretty soon. It's been an hour and a half.
So the opposite of the thing I said.
It's, yeah. We're just getting to that time point. Quickly?
I don't know if we should. Sure. Okay. So what do you think of the movie? Now that, like, has this discussion, changed your opinion of the movie?
Are you thinking final thoughts?
I suppose.
Okay. Yes, talking to you about it, of course, has deepened my understanding and appreciation of it. And that's why we're doing this. That's why, particularly with these classic movies, that's why I wanted to talk about them, because I find them hard to access, and talking about them helps me figure out why. So I think if I would have saw this, it's not the kind of movie that I would really be interested in watching again. But
same.
The ideas behind it are going to inform the other movies that I watch now. And it was visually interesting and captivating enough to make me watch the whole movie, but not something I would return to. I'm just like, okay, I'm happy I watched that. Time to move on. So 4 sleds out of 5. What about you?
Oh man, if he had 4 sleds, maybe he would have been more well-adjusted. Just the one sled for his entire life.
Yeah, he needed more.
He's like a multi-billionaire. He could buy more than one sled.
That's true. He didn't.
He had enough for like 5 bedposts. I think we see in like the final panning shot.
5 bedposts?
Yeah, like on the pile of trash that the camera pans over, there's like a pile of like bedposts or whatever. Or like, okay, I guess he didn't throw anything away. But yeah, no, like I said, this is the second time I've seen it, more or less. The first time I watched it, I didn't really care. I didn't really have the,
drive?
The drive, the context, the understanding, the attention to fully appreciate this masterpiece, this movie. That is apparently, is constantly voted, like AFI's top #1 movie.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Of all time?
Of all time, yeah.
Wow.
I think it might have recently lost to some other movie, but it's still.
It's up there.
It was #1 for the longest time, if it isn't anymore, and it's still, I guess, #2 if it isn't #1 anymore.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, like it wasn't until me watching it this time, watching it now, that I fully, or like I wouldn't say fully, but had a better appreciation for why the movie was so well regarded. Like for the longest time, I would have described the movie as a great movie, but not necessarily a good movie. In that, sure, I could appreciate all the groundbreaking things it did, but I didn't really like it as a movie. I didn't really enjoy it as a movie. But now watching it with the context and with the understanding and all the other words I described a couple seconds ago, I don't know, I like it more. It's good. It's fine.
But why would you not watch it again? So that's what you said before.
It's still an old movie.
Yeah.
It's still like, it's not, I don't know. I've in the past couple of years realized that I prefer more like genre fiction.
Oh.
And I don't know, maybe like, you know, like sci-fi or an action film or something, you know, something more modern.
Yeah.
You know, than this, faux biopic.
Right.
Which is, from what I understand, a genre that this, movie, if not created, at least, showed how to do well.
Mm-hmm.
None of the other examples can spring to mind at the moment. But there are a couple of, works of fiction that nominally are or present themselves to be the life story of a fictional character.
Yeah.
And that's become a thing.
Right. Or we have mockumentaries now.
Yeah, mockumentaries.
I couldn't stop thinking about The Great Gatsby with this film. The Great Gatsby seems like a more modern version of Citizen Kane. Although, no,
doesn't it take place in like the 20s?
Yeah.
I haven't read it or seen the movie, but
oh man,
I feel like it's not a more modern version of this story.
It's got to be around a similar time. Go on.
But yeah, no, I'm just going to keep rephrasing the thing I said before.
I enjoyed it.
Yeah, no, this viewing, I had a greater appreciation for it than in my previous viewing. I can now, like I said, I noticed some of the jokes that sort of flew past me. Mm-hmm. The first time I watched it.
The Great Gatsby was published in 1925.
Yes.
Wow.
A much more modern take on this 1941 film.
So it's really the other way around. This is the more modern version of this sort of idea.
I guess, yeah. I guess they, like, me not having a full understanding of The Great Gatsby, I've never read it.
Oh.
Or seen the movie.
I recommend. As much as I recommend D&D.
All I know about The Great Gatsby movie is that it both has the guy who played Spider-Man and the actress who was in a very good episode of Doctor Who.
Oh.
Carey Mulligan, I believe her name is.
Cool.
So I'm happy that she has hit the big screen.
Are you starting to appreciate watching older movies more? Because you said you find them particularly hard to watch.
I still find them hard to watch.
Oh.
I guess it helps that the ones that survive are the good ones.
Yeah, no kidding.
But there was something I was going to say. I forgot what it was. But what was it about? Yeah, like I this time around viewing it, I was able to catch some of the jokes I missed, some of the references, the foreshadowing, the the storytelling elements.
Yeah.
That I didn't really care to notice or pay enough attention to notice the previous time through. And now I am repeating myself again.
Makes sense.
But yeah, no, I
enjoyed it.
I enjoyed it.
How many sleds?
I thought we were not going to rate things. Exactly one sled. The one sled that was his final word. Right. Oh, that was another thing. But how, like, I remember hearing, I don't know if it's true or not, but I like the story, so I'm going to assume it's true. That how, during filming, one of the cast members went up to Orson Welles. And we should talk more about Orson Welles. You know, he also did War of the Worlds, the War of the Worlds radio play.
Did he?
Which we should add to the list.
Oh, shit, yeah.
I think it predated this? Yes. But apparently during filming, one of his cast members went up to him and basically said, if Kane dies alone in his room, how do they know what his last words are? And then Orson Welles just turns and grabs him by the lapels and is like, do not say that to anyone. Do not mention that to anyone.
What?
Because of it being like a huge plot hole of like the entire movie hinging on his dying words, but no one being around to hear his dying words.
That's true. Well, I guess the butler says he heard it.
But he wasn't anywhere near, as far as we could tell, though the nurse was maybe outside, and maybe if she had her ear pressed to the door, could hear him whispering his dying breath. But yeah, just the story of like Orson Welles just grabbing the guy by the collar, and it's like, do not say that to anybody. Ever.
Sweating profusely.
Yeah.
Well, I think that just about does it for us.
Yeah, thank you so much for listening to this podcast, this episode of All Doubt, which is in every way as good as the film Citizen Kane. If you'd like to... No, you can't listen to me say that with a straight face.
Oh, no, I agree. I agree 100%. Which is why we would love it if you give us 5 out of 5 on iTunes.
Yeah,
or
rate
wherever
us.
you listen to podcasts.
Rate us on Apple Podcasts. Tell your friends. Tell your family. Tell your family friends. Tell everybody.
Tell us.
Tell us by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts.
Or contacting us.
We also have a Patreon.
Okay,
where if
sure, we can just jump right to that and skip over what I was
saying. We have an order of things.
we?
Yes,
Oh,
I've
cool.
numbered the
Great.
things
Yeah,
we
that's
say.
fine. We don't have to do segues.
We also have a Patreon. If you like us and if you really like us and you feel like rating us really highly and leaving a review just is not enough, and you want to do that extra amount, you could support us on Patreon. We're on Patreon under the same name as everything else, All Doubt. We also have a website, AllDoubtPod.com.
We got it.
You can find us on Facebook, also at AllDoubt, and on Twitter at AllDoubtPod. Tweet at us and interact with us on Twitter. And the very best way to interact with us is by sending us an email at our email, alldoubtpod@gmail.com. Send us your questions, send us your comments, send us your the things that keep you up at night. That could backfire terribly. Don't do that.
Yeah, do it.
Don't do that.
I want to see. Well, I mean, we're talking like fears. That could be fun.
Use your judgment.
Well, your options are sending it or not, and I'm supporting sending it. You're supporting not. So
hopefully those balance out.
Yeah.
And that's all the contact information I have on this piece of paper that I keep with us. How do we end these?
Just like that.
Tune in next time when we talk about something also. Nope.
The Sound of Music.
We're doing the Sound of Music next?
The Sound of Music next.
Okay.
Hell yeah.